This week is the Yom Tif of Bshvat, the Rosh Hashanah Ilanos. Now obviously Bshvat is related to the laws of Meiser, of which year the fruit is regarding figuring out which type of Meisers to separate. However, it's obviously a much deeper Yom Tif. The question is, what is Bshvat? How do we all relate to this? What does it mean for us? So let me share with you the following story. It's an unbelievable story. The story goes that in 1895, there was a Hasidic Rebbe who was born. His name was Rabbi Cheskel Taub. His father was the Yabloiner Rebbe, and in 1920 he took over the Kehillah after his father's passing, and he became the Yabloiner Rebbe, Rabbi Cheskel Taub. In 1925, he decided that he's going to emigrate his Kehillah to Eretz Yisrael, which is obviously a controversial thing at the time for a Hasidic Rebbe to basically move to a moshav. But this is what they decided to do. He was going to leave behind the wealthier Jews in Europe, and they're going to fund the project, and the rest of them are going to go to Eretz Yisrael, build up the Kehillah, build up the moshav, and then everyone else will move up. Now, when the wealthier Jews stayed behind, not only did they help fund the project, they sent additional money to buy houses and plots of land for themselves, so that when they moved to Eretz Yisrael, they'd have a place to go. But everything that could go wrong did go wrong. When these Jews, the Yabloiner Rebbe and his Kehillah, they actually moved, the moshav they decided was near Haifa. It's called Kfar Hasidim even today. But everything went wrong. There was a malaria outbreak, there was flooding, there was pillage by Arabs at night, and it got so bad to the point where they had no food. It was mamish pikuach nefesh. So at this point, the Yabloiner Rebbe decided, right or wrong, he felt obviously what he was doing was right. He took the land that was allocated for the Jews in Europe, and he sold it in order to feed the Jews that were there, because of pikuach nefesh. They didn't have food, they were going to die. Now, when the Hasidim, some of the Hasidim started moving from Europe to Eretz Yisrael, and they said, "Where's our land?" And he said, "Well, I had to sell it." They were not happy, and they were screaming, "He's a ganef, and you played with our money, and you were unethical," and they threw all the vitriol that you could imagine. So Rabbi Cheskel Taub decided he's going to try to make this work. So he's going to try to make this whole. So he goes to America for a few years to fundraise. So he goes to LA to fundraise. Now, a few years later, as he's in midst of fundraising to try to make everything better, World War II breaks out, which obviously was the end of the fundraising. But worse than this, he finds out that the Kehillah in Europe was destroyed by the Nazis in Machshma. So at this point, this is where the story takes a turn. He thinks to himself, I don't have a Kehillah in Europe. The Kehillah in Eretz Yisrael think I'm a ganef. Ein melech b'lo yam. So he decides, Rabbi Cheskel Taub decides, I can't do this anymore. I'm not a Rebbe anymore. I'm not religious anymore. He shaves off his beard. He shaves off his payas. Becomes not religious bichlal. And changes his name from Yecheskel Taub to George Nagel. And for the next 40 years, he lives in LA, not religious at all. He took a BA in psychology and completely had a separate life as George Nagel. Now, 40 years later, when he's in his early 80s, his great nephew reaches out to him and says, "You got to come back to Kfar Hasidim. You got to come back." So he's pushing it off. He doesn't want. He says, "I can't face them. I can't face them. I can't. Finally, after a lot of prodding, he decides, fine, I'm going to take a flight to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to go to Kfar Hasidim. But if I can't, he tells his nephew, if I can't stay, I'm going to stay in Haifa. I may not be able to face them, and I'm not staying long." See, he gets on the flight, he flies, his nephew takes him to Kfar Hasidim, and the nephew says, "We have a surprise for you." They go into the Kfar Hasidim, and they go into an auditorium. When he walks in, he sees there's hundreds of Jews there. And this is where he's wincing again. He's still George Nagel at this point. No beard, no pay, not religious bichlal. And he's ready for them to start screaming at him, to start, attacking him and giving them a piece of their mind. At this point, an older woman gets up and she says, "Rebbe, do you remember me?" So he's looking, "Rebbe, I don't look like a Rebbe anymore." And she says, "Do you remember me?" He says, I don't remember you." She says her name and she says, "I just want to say thank you." He said, "Thank you for what?" She said, "You saved my life." She said, if not for you, I would have been in Europe and I would have been killed." And they all, one after the other, get up and say, "Thank you, thank you." You see, despite the mistakes that he made with the money, but at the end of the day, if not for him, they would all have been stayed in Europe. They would have all been killed. And they all get up and they say, "This is all your payers. This is all for you. This is all because of you." And he had never thought of it that way. You see, for 40 years, he was a failure to them, he was a failure to himself, and he was a failure to Hashem. But all of a sudden now it dawned on him that despite those mistakes, which were very real, but he saved all of their lives. And all of them and their children and their grandchildren are only there because of him. When he realized this, then all of a sudden his life began to change. And the story has a happy ending. He became religious again. He grew the beard and payas. He moved back to Kfar Hasidim, and he ended his life giving shiurim and teaching as the Yabloner Rebbe. And currently today, in Kfar Hasidim, there is his kever by the Beis HaKvaros that says, over here is buried the Admar of Yablon. It makes no reference of George Nagel, just how he started and how he finished. See, once he realized that he wasn't the biggest failure, once he realized that he wasn't the worst person to ever live, then all of a sudden, he was able to go back to Hashem. People go off the derech not because they have shilas and a rajma. They go off the derech because they think they have nothing to give to another person. They think they have nothing to give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they think they have nothing to give to themselves. You know what the Indian of Tu B'Shvat is? Tu B'Shvat is you have a tree that looks dead, that looks like a failure. It looks like it has nothing to give. It has nothing to give to Klal Yisrael, nothing to give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's the Indian of Tu B'Shvat? Although it might look like on the outside that it's completely dead, there's sap growing. On the outside it might look like George Nagel, but inside there's Yechezkel Tav, there's the Yabloner Rebbe. That's the Indian of Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is celebrating that Nekudas Achiyas, that point of light,